please welcome Bill Faloon.
Thank you. Thank you for those very kind words. Now the topic of my presentation tonight is what's delaying your access to effective age reversal interventions, and what can we do about it? We are being denied right now access. And this slide is the most frightening set of statistics that I have ever seen. This was published in April 2023 by the American Medical Association. The bastion of conventional medicine is admitting that there's an average of a 17-year delay from the time an evidence-based therapy is identified before it makes it into your doctor's office. And even more frightening is that only 1 in 5 of these biomedical discoveries even makes it into routine clinical practice. What is that saying? It means most people who are suffering degenerative illnesses and dying may not need to. There may be effective therapies to mitigate or treat those diseases, and we've got a bureaucratic barrier standing in the way of that situation. And it's being increasingly recognized. Popular Mechanics talked about earlier this year the fact that reversal of aging, well, that's a scientific possibility, but what's getting in the way is the FDA. They won't recognize aging as a disease, and that's holding back all kinds of pharmaceutical research that could be finding a way to keep us alive forever. We need to do something about that. Now, there's a couple ways of making it happen. We were engaged with the HIV/AIDS groups in the 1980s, 1990s. We were engaged in all kinds of ways of trying to make the FDA understand we weren't going to die. We weren't going to accept death. I'm going to show you these clips a little bit later in this presentation. We fought back, and frankly, we prevailed. So our dilemma today is there's all kinds of interventions a lot of you are using right now. Self-experimentation. Most of us are doing it to one degree or another. What we need to do is rapidly assess the efficacy of these therapies and also make sure we're doing everything we can to slow aging today. So one solution I'm going to talk about is the Perpetual Project. And that is continue utilizing everything you're doing right now to remain alive and healthy. Do that and then allow us to measure in real time the results. What's going on in the bodies of thousands of people, put that into a statistical database and find what we should ideally be doing right now to avoid premature aging and death. Now, for those who don't know me, I founded a group called Life Extension in 1977. We started publishing in 1980, and we have a track record of bringing out therapies, nutrients, drugs, etc. We bring them out 10 to 20 years ahead of the medical mainstream. We do that in a way that people gain access. Now, people didn't always have stocked rows of shelves like this, aisles in Walgreens and GNC packed with melatonin, DHEA, CoQ10, lycopene. Well, that's because we fought a battle against the FDA starting in the 1980s, culminating in 1994. Congress passed a law that allowed dietary supplements like this to be sold widely. Before that, it was a hard time getting information about supplements, and there weren't a lot of companies selling them. Now you have a wide range of choices. We publish a magazine every month that talks about ways that you might be able to reduce your risk of a degenerative illness and maybe slow down aging. We work very hard to provide science-based information to help people live longer. So our less controversial contention today, compared to when RAADfest started in 2016, is that we may be able to induce some degree of age reversal, as you've already been hearing today on this stage, induce age reversal in people today. What I'm going to do right now is go over some media highlights from last year's RAADfest. That was only 11 months ago, October 2022. Since then, the media has done us a lot of favors. Now, last year's RAADfest was in San Diego. We had a lot of people there. And 6 weeks after RAADfest ended, the University of California at San Diego was awarded an additional $8 million to do human stem cell clinical research. Now, maybe RAADfest had something to do with it. Maybe it was a coincidence. But the more we get together and say we want these therapies, the more inspired the scientists, the donors are to make these results happen. Make it happen in the real world. $8 million additional dollars to figure out how to make stem cells work. Medscape. Now that is a conventional website that doctors go to get information on new therapies, how to prescribe drugs better. They even get their continuing medical education credits. Well, they talked about in December 2022 about research indicating that we can delay the onset of degenerative illness, that doctors now should be focusing on biomarkers so that it can institute interventions now to prevent and treat age-related disease. These kind of topics were not talked about before RAADfest. These were considered something people would get old, they get sick, they die. Now the doctors are being told, well, do something about it. But you know what? Even Medscape said, unfortunately, the FDA failing to recognize aging as a disease, it's causing delays because no one wants to spend a lot of money on a drug when the FDA will not approve it for treating aging. We need to do something about that. I'm going to tell you how to do that. So as it relates to a lot of the language being used in the media, headlines now, the idea of curing aging, I'm seeing that over and over again. We were ridiculed in 2016. He said, you can't do that. And now the scientific community is saying, yeah, we can do that. National Geographic did an extensive report on the various age reversal interventions being utilized now, all of which was talked about at RAADfest 2016 all the way up to the beginning, but they summarized it in an extensive article. That's December 28th, and then January 1st, Wired, they talked about an anti-aging drug being available by the end of this year, and they are looking to create something where a pipeline is discovered in a way that we can rapidly introduce medications into the bodies of people. And if that works the way we expect it to, it'll be the greatest revolution since the discovery of antibiotics. Absolutely fantastic. Financial Times, a respected international newspaper, they're talking about startups seeking a cure for old age. And again, 2015, 2016, no one talked about it. It was considered just an impossibility, and they reported on what we already know, Buck Institute and Dr. Barzilli, all kind of people doing research, trying to figure out how to make people live longer. This study came out, and it had to do with young plasma being transfused into rats, and they were able for the first time to extend maximum lifespan using young plasma. A lot of people were self-experimenting with different young plasma concentrates. This at least indicated if we do it right, we might be able to live longer than what we're genetically predisposed to. So I was excited to see that. And then Sam Altman, well, what a lot of publicity he's getting. He's one of these self-made, very wealthy people who's pouring huge amounts of money into research to find a way to delay and reverse aging. He's that kind of person who just doesn't want to die, like us. So he feels, I've got the money, I might as well put it into this kind of research. So he's getting all kind of publicity, and again, the media talking about conquering death. Again, that was not ever talked about before 2015. It's now becoming a scientific reality that the technology will evolve eventually so we get to live a real long time. He's predicting that there'll be a pill available to help reverse the effects of aging within the next 5 years, which is why it's so important that we stay alive for the next 5 to 8 years to take advantage of these coming breakthroughs. And here we have these very young people under age 40 recognizing, well, I've got all this money, I might as well spend a little bit of it on a lot of research. And he's doing that really, really well. Wall Street Journal reporting on people with shorter telomeres. They have 3 times the rate of a sudden heart attack death, and they have an 8 times greater risk of dying from infections. So as it relates to telomere elongation, that's still kind of experimental, but what isn't, if you want to accelerate telomere attrition, shorten them fast, we'll engage in bad habits, processed food, excess alcohol, smoking, just everything that people are doing to injure themselves, that can be mitigated if you stay healthy and your telomeres will at least remain a little longer. Now, Mark Hyman, medical doctor who wrote a great article about delaying brain aging. He was in the cover of our 2009 Life Extension magazine. I was so pleased to see that in March, I'm going in chronological order, by the way, since last year's RAADfest, his book called Young Forever. And I love the title, by the way. You could make that the name of this conference, but I like Revolution better, as I'm going to show you a little bit later. But his book, #1 bestseller, early March 2023. A couple weeks later, Peter Attia's book called Outlive, and he talked a lot about what doctors are failing to do to prevent heart disease, stroke, cancer, dementia. It's a spectacular book that Peter Attia published and wrote and got to the #1 bestseller list. Now, that means a lot. The 2 books in March talking about people living a lot longer are the #1 most popular books that people are reading today. So the major the major scientific advance. This was reported, published in Science, by the way, the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, I believe. It was published in Science and picked up by the media, the mass media. And this was a major increase in lifespan. Now, these were yeast cells. Now, for people who don't understand, yeast cells have a lot of genetically conserved mechanistic structures that make them very similar to human stem cells. So what does that mean? Well, what works in a yeast cell might work in a human stem cell. So what they did is they alternated the expression of two pro-longevity genes, SIR2 and HAP4. They did it in a way that they would turn on SIR2, suppress HAP4, and vice versa. And when they were able to do this throughout the entire lifespan of the yeast cells, they got a remarkable 105% increase in lifespan. The term is genetic oscillation, and the idea of extending life that much is just absolutely tremendous. Now, SIR2, that stands for Silent Information Regulator 2, that regulates the health of our nucleus, DNA repair. And then HAP4, that promotes mitochondrial biogenesis. We need both. We need to continue renewing mitochondria, and we need to make sure our DNA is repaired. If we don't have that, we're in pretty bad shape. This is a simple description of how these scientists did it. They used genetic engineering to overexpress SIR2 or HAP, and by doing that, express SIR2, suppress HAP, up and down, they were able to achieve that remarkable 105% lifespan extension. It's just amazing. That graph to the right, lifespan change in yeast. Now, the purple are the yeast who are just normal, and they die normally. The red dashes going all the way out shows that 105% median average lifespan, median improvement, but also maximum lifespan was extended in these yeast cells using this simple genetic alteration technique. And you're going to learn a lot this weekend about gene therapies being utilized right now and experimented with to keep people alive. And if we can ever alter our genes like this, well, we get to live a real long time. And just to make this abundantly clear, the top hourglass, these are two, by the way, pro-longevity genes. If you express both of them high, SIR2 and HAP, you live 42% longer if you're a yeast cell, hopefully a human stem cell. But that Goldilocks zone, if you swap them, turn on SIR2, suppress or silence HAP, and vice versa, you get that 105% increase. Now, last year, I talked about the first time in history that I know of that they were able to take live mice, use Yamanaka transcription factors to slow down and reverse aging in these mice. It was a well-publicized study. The whole world found out that aging can indeed go in reverse using Yamanaka transcription factors. It was a spectacular study, and just to make it clear what was done here, when they reprogrammed these cells in live mice, not in a petri dish, not in something that's synthetic, these were live mice given transcription factors, they were able to, younger looking skin, is that important for most people? Lower inflammation, reduce senescence, associated secretory phenotype. But the problem is no data collected on lifespan. Here they reversed biological aging in these mice. They were able to document all the different benefits of that, but they didn't keep them alive long enough compared to a control group to know, are they really living longer? And then just 9 months later, Harvard, they also used Yamanaka factors to reverse epigenetic aging and produce a lot of good data, which was fantastic. Seeing aging go in reverse, it's fantastic. And of course, the media reported on this, old mice growing young again. When are people going to be able to do that? So the researchers showed epigenetic markers improving, age reversed at will. They were able to control aging, both forward and backwards, with Yamanaka factors in live mice. But again, no data that we know of collected on longevity. Were these mice living longer in response to them growing younger? We don't know, and that was frustrating. Until January 9th. A third company, a third group, again used 3 out of the 4 Yamanaka factors, and they were able to rejuvenate the old mice, but they also extended their remaining lifespan. And why is that so important? Well, if something were to work in a 30-year-old to keep them alive forever, that'd be great. We're older than that for the most part. We want something that's going to take our 80-year-old bodies, 90-year-old bodies, and put that in reverse and extend our remaining lifespan. And what they did at Rejuvenate Bio is they took mice that were an average of 77 human equivalent years. And they gave them the Yamanaka factors, the OSK, and they reported more than doubling the remaining lifespan of these very old mice. And frailty also reduced. Frailty is a validated marker of aging. If you can reverse that, you're reversing aging. So what they did to do this is very simple. They took a rather innocuous virus and they encoded it with 3 out of the 4 Yamanaka transcription factors. They then injected these old mice with the Yamanaka factor encoded virus. And they used doxycycline as a triggering agent. And I say that because you don't want Yamanaka factors overexpressed all the time. You want to be able to turn them on, turn them off. When they put doxycycline in drinking water, it turned on the expression of the Yamanaka factors. And what were the results? Wow. Reversal of epigenetic aging markers, restored youthful functionality. This is remarkable. So many people are calling me right now asking, when can I use Yamanaka factors? I can't tell you exactly when, but I'm working on research to make them available to people who want to self-experiment as soon as practical. But to put this into context, if you are 77 years of age today and you're relatively healthy, you're supposed to make it to age 87. Now, if we can put those Yamanaka factors in you and get the same result we did in the mice, you go from dying at 87 to making it to 98. Now, it's more than just an extra 10 years. This moves you into an era when people may no longer die. That extra 10 years might be the difference. So this is why experimenting as we are doing, and I'm self-experimenting with everything you can imagine, we want to extend our remaining lifespan to be here when immortality becomes a reality. And Elon Musk, he talks about it every once in a while. People are going to be able to live forever if they want to, and he's predicted in November that the FDA was going to allow him to do computer brain implants to treat all kinds of diseases. And well, sure enough, in May, FDA approved a study in which brain implants will be put into people to see if that can cure obesity, depression, all kinds of psychological problems. But look at the problem here. Elon Musk wanted to do that in 2019. FDA said no. And it took him 4 times. And this is Elon Musk, you understand, richest man in the world at one point. He couldn't get the FDA to move. It took him 4 years. And that means if this works, a lot of people died unnecessarily. So I'm going to take a little water break and play you a very brief clip of Elon Musk talking about living forever.
There are people like Ray Kurzweil who doesn't think it's a problem at all.
Some people want to live forever or for a much longer period of time, and they see AI as the only way to, or digital superintelligence as the only thing that can figure out how to get them to live forever. I think Kurzweil is in that category. So he would prefer to have AI, artificial general intelligence, than not, because it can figure out longevity.
Wow, talking about immortality. Ray Kurzweil is back in the news. He predicts if we can live just another 8-9 years, we may live forever. May live forever. Nano robots, all kinds of technologies. So we have to enhance human life expectancy so that it advances faster than our biological age. If we do that, we could very well live forever. Now, this next slide, an editorial published in the Wall Street Journal. Now, this is semi-vindication for me and some other immortalists. We've been trying to advertise in the Wall Street Journal about the prospect of immortality since the 1970s. Well, they go and publish an editorial acknowledging that people very well may eventually live forever. The technology is there. Ray Kurzweil and others are projecting exactly how it'll happen. And the idea that it's going to happen, now they're being naysayers saying it's not really a good thing. People are going to get bored. There might be all kinds of social problems. And yet they're acknowledging the science. And that's a major milestone to have a conservative publication recognizing that immortality is no longer an impossibility. In fact, it's probably going to happen, but do we really want it? Now, I think everyone in this room wants it, and if the rest of the world doesn't, I don't really care. It's up to them. I mean, if you don't want to live, I'm not going to mandate that. So again, when I read this, I said, wow, the Wall Street Journal finally recognizes, and didn't charge me anything, by the way, to publish an article on this. A little country in Eastern Europe is changing their laws to expedite the development of longevity drugs. Something we need to do in the United States, because the research quality in the United States is probably a lot better here, but the fact is one country is doing it, maybe there'll be some copycats. So the Wall Street Journal is talking about longevity clinics opening up right now, and what I love about this is they talk about the growing number of Americans who are obsessed with living longer. And I like that word obsession because if you look at the people who have made the scientific breakthroughs throughout the centuries, they had an obsession to make it happen. So as more and more people are obsessed, like I am, like Jim and the whole group here, well, that's going to accelerate progress and a lot more money being put into longevity clinics, so we may be able to have access. And this article, and bear in mind, this has all been happening since last year's RAADfest. This expert, a geneticist who has a lot of credibility as far as his technical ability, is talking about people living thousands of years once we're able to reprogram old cells back into young cells, and they're already doing it with Yamanaka factors in old mice. So it's just going to take a little bit more technology, so we may live way longer than anyone ever expected it to happen. And again, more and more articles appearing about scientists working to turn back the clock to make old people young again. And this came across my email just like a week ago. Singapore is opening the first healthy longevity clinic in a respected hospital. This is the government of Singapore and the hospital and some charities putting all this together, and what they're going to do is test evidence-based treatments like repurposed drugs, metformin, rapamycin, dasatinib, NAD infusions, exosomes, young plasma, all these different therapies they're going to be testing in Singapore, which would be fantastic, because if they report results, and they're going to conduct research, by the way, in new technologies we haven't even heard of yet. If they report results, we can emulate that in this country and garner those benefits. So I can't wait for that to happen. And then finally, the Saudi Arabia government is coming through with their commitment of spending $1 billion a year on aging research. Even with $1 billion a year, you have to work to find the scientists who can really use that money effectively. So they've only spent under $20 million of it so far, but it is going into really good organizations, nonprofit groups, who are funding some aging research right now, and their objective is to move the money up as fast as they can once they identify the scientists who need the funding. So this is all spectacular news. Now, last year, I showed you the Better Humans building, one of their buildings going up. It was in a very early stage of construction. Better Humans is a charity, by the way, that I heavily support. I'll probably give them about $1 million this year, and thank goodness a multi-billionaire is giving them a lot more money. This multi-billionaire, by the way, approached me and asked me who should I write a check out to so I might grow younger. I sent them to Better Humans, and he spent a lot of money. So this is the new building. The building itself is complete, and this is, to me, going to be the most advanced cell biology lab in the world dedicated to immortality. They're not dedicated to publishing a paper or making some money off of some product they sell. They want to move the needle forward very, very quickly. So that building was under construction. It's virtually done. They're just waiting for some pieces of infrastructure equipment, and they will be done. And what they're seeking to do is make sure that their research results are unassailable. They don't want to have anything to interfere with the outcome. So they've got multiple clean rooms, all kinds of equipment to literally disinfect people before they get into a cell biology situation. They don't want the cells or the animals in the vivarium to get infected by people. So there's air showers for people, air showers for new equipment they bring in. This is high tech. The multi-billionaire basically gave him a blank check, and he was willing to give me a blank check, but I have to do two things. I have to run life extension, and I have to work on age reversal research. Better Humans does it full time. So these are pictures of the lab about a month and a half ago. They've made more progress since then, and I can't tell you how impressed I am by the research they are doing. I have nothing to do with this group, by the way, except I write them checks to give them money because I see the results. And this was the existing building on the property. It used to be an old church, and they cleared it out, and they now have a laboratory to keep people or give us information that enables us to live a lot longer. So, what is our objective today? We need to delay biological aging. We need to stay alive in order to achieve immortality, because immortality is not necessarily 6 months away or 2 years away, maybe 8 years away or 15 years away. So what can we do to delay our date of death? Well, I'm going to nominate something as the Healthy Longevity Advance of 2023. Now, last year, that Healthy Longevity Advance, if you're 60, would add about 8 years to your lifespan. It required a lot of dietary changes that are challenging for people, but it emphasized a lot of legumes, nuts, whole grains, and no processed foods, no red meat, things like that. And this year, though, it's a lot more simple. And the criteria for a healthy advance, an age delay advance, is very important. It has to be affordable. Not everybody has a lot of money to spend on these therapies, so it's got to be available to everyone. It's got to be easy to take, It has to have broad consumer access, no patents, nothing to cause this to not be readily available, and it's got to have some history of being efficacious. It just can't come out of left field and all of a sudden demonstrate efficacy in one study. And great news is, new data has demonstrated something that cost under $10 a month, that inexpensive, to add a lot of years to your potential lifespan. This again is Science, the most prestigious journal I know in the world in this field. They talked about a taurine deficiency as a causative driver of aging. And they wrote in their study that taurine may be an effective anti-aging intervention. Now, you don't see this very often, where they do a lot of research, and this was an international team of researchers doing their own research around the world. They combined it into one massive article talking about an anti-aging intervention that is readily available. Now, the news picked up on this, and if you missed it, I understand. There's a lot of clutter out there. But the news picked up on the fact that is taurine an elixir of life, a key to a longer life? Yeah, all the media picked up on it, and it's just so fantastic how inexpensive this is. It's sold by hundreds of companies, by the way. So what I really didn't realize until this study came out is that when we grow older, our taurine blood levels decline markedly. And the reason for that is an enzyme that converts cysteine into taurine, it declines. And as a result, we just don't have the taurine we used to have. And what they found is that lower taurine concentrations in animals and people was associated with age-related problems. And taurine concentrations in mice, monkeys, worms, and people, it all plummets with age. So obviously, we need to do something to restore our taurine levels, because when they supplemented mice with taurine, they extended their lifespan 10 to 12%, and life expectancy increased 10 to 25%. And, well, it's the same with the worms, with the monkeys. They were able to see a consistent benefit, such as, well, more functionality, healthier, less body fat, more bone density, which a lot of us need, by the way. The taurine-fed mice, they had all kinds of indicators of slowing down aging. And again, under $10 a month, sold by hundreds of companies. No one should do without this. It was at one point near the bottom, frankly, of my supplement list. It's kind of gone to the top right now based on this new data. Now, again, I like to use these analogies. If taurine works the same in humans as it does mice, and it extends life expectancy 18 to 25%. If we start, let's say at age 43, taking taurine, our life expectancy might go from 79 to 85 years of age, an extra 6 or more years. And that's what we're looking for. Any way we can utilize now that we can afford, that's widely available, to extend our lifespan. And taurine, I think, is that situation. Now, what the investigators in the Science journal reported is that lower taurine levels in people was found to be associated with the typical age-related problems. Abdominal obesity, inflammation, diabetes, hypertension, all of those conditions that we are dying from may be associated with a taurine deficiency. So where do you get taurine? Well, animal products, meat, eggs, dairy. You don't want to eat that stuff, by the way, but if you are, you'll get a little bit of taurine. Seafood, healthy, but it still doesn't give you much taurine. So the typical American diet, you get about 180 milligrams of taurine, not nearly enough to replace what you lose with aging. And if you're a vegan or vegetarian, you may only get 17 milligrams a day of taurine. So remember, the blood taurine levels, as we grow older and become elderly, they're 80% less than when we were young and healthy. And that's massive. That's massive. Now, the culprit is that reduced activity of that enzyme, cysteine sulfonate decarboxylase. That enzyme decreases. We don't convert cysteine into taurine anymore, and it may accelerate aging. So consider supplementing with 1,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day of taurine, again, under $10 a month, and that range may go up. We may start talking about 5 to 6 grams, but let's just see what happens when people start supplementing with about 1,000 to 3,000 milligrams. So what I would nominate for the Healthy Longevity Advance of this year, and I'm happy to have other people talk about what they may feel, is something that's inexpensive, widely available, and could add some years, healthy years, to your lifespan. Now, one of the caveats is if you have end-stage renal failure, you might not be able to tolerate a lot of taurine. Just take a very low dose of it because you might not clear it with your kidneys. So, what is delaying the implementation of all these sciences out there? Why aren't people using these on a regular basis? And what can we do to overcome all that? Well, it shouldn't surprise you. The FDA. All these advances are being held back by an agency that just has lost control of what their primary mission is supposed to be. And I'm showing this again, a 17-year wait. And the FDA is one reason why there's that delay. There are other reasons, patent office delays, just inertia, but a lot of that is because it's so hard to get something past the FDA. And the fact that there's interventions out there that will never make it into medical practice, that's very frightening. By way of example, heart failure kills 400,000 Americans every year. Now, a study came out this year showing that just one infusion of stem cells directly into the heart with a catheter, it reduced the heart attack and stroke risk by 58%. Can you imagine if you had 400,000 Americans dying of heart failure and you could slash that number by 58%? And those who had high inflammation levels, a 75% reduction in death from stroke or heart attack. Now, this is a major, major advance. Well, maybe it really isn't, because Johns Hopkins did the same research or similar research in 2012. And they found that when they injected stem cells directly into the heart muscle, they were able to show reduced heart muscle scarring and enhanced heart pumping capability. That's ejection fraction. They boosted ejection fraction by putting in stem cells directly into the heart, the same way they do with a catheter and when they put in a stent. Instead of putting a stent in necessarily, they just put the stem cells in. But it's not even that new. Back in 2003, we published an article that was widely disseminated in the media, by the way. A young boy, he took a staple gun into his heart, and he was about to die, or he was not functional anymore, and the FDA gave doctors permission for him to undergo a stem cell infusion directly into his heart muscle, and he doubled his ejection fraction from 20%, which is very low, up to 40%, and he restored near normal lifespan. That's a 20-year delay from when stem cells were shown to save people from heart failure, and we've got new evidence showing it really works. We're still waiting for FDA approval. A 20-year wait for this therapy. And there's a doctor here in this audience who's been doing this work, and I'm hoping that I can refer you all to him if you have heart failure. Once I do my usual investigation, I will let you know. In case you know someone with heart failure, you can go to another part of the world and get this therapy done on your own. So we've got the FDA standing in our way. This is the cover of a website that I'm putting together about what the FDA is doing. They're killing a lot of people. Now, the FDA pretends, this is their headquarters in Rockville, Maryland, they pretend they are responsible for advancing the public health by helping to speed innovations. Okay? This is what the FDA says on their website. They claim to make medical products more effective, safer, and more affordable. Amazing. Now, the truth is, and I think this is pretty well accepted, the left is what the FDA says, what they do on the right. FDA impairs the public health by delaying interventions, and it makes medical products less effective, less safe, and certainly less affordable. And it's no longer Bill Faloon saying this. I've been saying it for 45 plus years. This is a former commissioner of the FDA who wrote a scathing editorial once he left the FDA saying we've got all these incredible advances in molecular medicine, cures for dementia and cancer, and yet the FDA does not recognize this. The fact that they're not up to date on the science means they can't even evaluate these advanced molecular therapies. So that's a former commissioner. Here is an acting commissioner testifying under oath before Congress stating that the FDA is relying on 20th century regulatory science to try to evaluate 21st century products, the products, medical products we're relying on to save our lives. And as it relates to affordability, this is the current commissioner of the FDA, and he's complaining that drug prices are too high. So everything the FDA pretends to do on their website, I've just kind of shown you in a very quick format, it's just not true. It's a fabrication. In Cato Institute, they looked at this situation and realized all this science, but where are the therapies? Why aren't I seeing greater life expectancy in people? And the fact is, FDA's rules need to be changed so life-saving therapies can become available at greater speed. British Medical Journal citing the chronic failure of the FDA to even oversee clinical trials. They're making a lot of mistakes. It's why bad drugs sometimes get out the door, don't work very well, but they sometimes kill people. But it's not because of the inability of science to correct that. A lot of it has to do with the FDA not regulating clinical trials. This is front page, the Wall Street Journal. The FDA has put a record number of clinical holds on research, on human studies designed to see what can be done to make people live longer or combat a nasty disease. And a clinical hold occurs after a lot of work was done to get an investigational new drug application approved by the FDA. You start the study, and this can take multiple years to do, and then the FDA comes in and says, we're stopping it. We're stopping that study. Now, one reason it makes sense is if there's danger, if it's a safety issue, we understand. But the FDA admitted the reason they often stop a clinical trial is they don't understand the technology. It's too new. Since they don't understand it, they stop the research. And I think everyone in this room is relying on new technology to stay alive, and we got the FDA stopping clinical trials that could give us potential cures for the diseases that are afflicting Americans. And by way of example, ribavirin, discovered in 1972. We were recommending it to our members in 1983, and that resulted in me being thrown in jail. And then a couple years later, they threw the owner of the ICN pharmaceutical company in jail because we were both promoting ribavirin. That is a broad-spectrum antiviral drug available throughout the world, except the United States, until 1998. FDA approves the ribavirin. Well, that's nice. What about all those decades when it could have been saving lives? So we did a calculation, and the FDA's delay of ribavirin alone killed about 60,000 hepatitis C patients. When you combine ribavirin with alpha interferon, you basically double the survival rate. When you combine ribavirin with Sovaldi or Harvoni, that can sometimes improve the survival rate. So 60,000 dead Americans because of the FDA's delay of one drug, and a lot of resources expended by the FDA to put people in jail who are promoting ribavirin, which at that time was approved around the world, except the United States. So I want to give you one more example of what the FDA is doing, because this should be pretty simple. 1985, our anti-aging newsletter talked about using common dietary supplements, nothing that was proprietary to us, to slow the progression of HIV into full-blown AIDS. That was 1985. A couple years later, stormtroopers raided our facility. They seized our vitamins, they seized our newsletters, and well, eventually they put me in jail. They said, if you just stop what you're doing, you will be okay. I said, well, I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. I'm saving lives. So they threw me in jail, and it was a long battle and that sort of thing. But what we were able to accomplish is again, unprecedented. I'm going to take another water break and play a brief clip of me on a national TV show. I was on many of them, by the way, during these FDA wars.
I've had to stare down the barrel of a .45 caliber handgun. I've had FDA agents armed to break down my doors, seize my vitamins. They don't like what I have to say. But what I said back in 1985 in our newsletter about using vitamins to slow the progression of AIDS now is acknowledged by the FDA as being true.
That acknowledgement came in the FDA's own magazine, FDA Consumer, 10 years after they went berserk over life extension promoting low-cost supplements. FDA said, if you're an HIV-positive person, you ought to take some micronutrients, some vitamins and minerals. Wow, 10 years late. Well, the idea that the FDA was 10 years late meant people died sooner than we were supposed to. But here's what's really amazing. This is 30 years after Life Extension recommended HIV-positive people take some vitamins. Wow, they did a meta-analysis of all the studies in which they tested various supplements on HIV-positive people, and just taking a multivitamin supplement, 38% reduction in disease progression into full-blown AIDS. Adding selenium, that reduced disease progression 64%. And just taking zinc, you can't get much of a lower price nutrient than zinc, sold everywhere, 71% reduced mortality. And the cost of all those nutrients, $12 to $40 a year. And the FDA denied access to that information about nutrients that could slow the progression of AIDS. So I got lots of free publicity in response to the FDA trying to put me in jail forever, and we used that to our advantage. I got on all kind of national TV talk shows. People joined our life extension group just because we were fighting the FDA. In fact, when they raided us, we had 4,000 members, and when they well, you're going to see we had 25,000 members after we won, and we did. We prevailed against the FDA both in Congress and in the federal court. We went to Congress with a number of allies to get the Dietary Supplement and Health and Education Act passed, so that stopped the FDA from seizing supplements the way they did, and the Department of Justice dismissed the indictment brought against us by the FDA. And they did that mainly because they realized they were never going to win in front of a jury based on the data we had to substantiate what we were doing, i.e. saving lives while the FDA was taking lives. So the problem with the FDA now is they allow the nutrients to be sold, that's good, but they get in the way of doctors trying to do some innovative medicine. A lot of doctors have to work offshore, but they're delaying age reversal clinical trials. And there's a couple ways to fight against this type of FDA tyranny. And the HIV groups did it really well. They staged protests around the FDA's headquarters. And these protests went on the whole day long. These are people typically with HIV and AIDS, and they knew there were effective drugs in other countries. In Europe, the diflucan was approved, not in the United States, aerosolized pentamidine, a lot of anti-HIV drugs available in other countries, but they weren't allowed in the United States by the FDA. So they protested. We worked with them in many, many ways, including helping them get those drugs to save their lives. One reason I was thrown in jail, by the way. And well, these kind of protests, and I don't think we have to resort to this ourselves, but these people went on the front lines, and that silence equals death. Well, that pertains to what we are doing here. If we just walk out of here and don't protest what the FDA is doing, then that's unfortunate because the FDA will continue doing that. But you know what they won? The HIV community won an exemption from the FDA's regulatory umbrella. They were allowed to import any drug in the world that might work. They were allowed to manufacture in the United States any drug that would work because the FDA was tired of the protests around their building and all kind of other activities of these HIV groups. And it means that we've got the power to make a very small change in the FDA's attitude as it relates to age reversal clinical research. We're just asking to do the research. We're not asking to get their authorization to approve a drug. So this petition, I showed at last year's RAADfest. And what I'm disappointed in, frankly, is that I've shown this to over 10,000 people. And I've only got 314 people who are willing to take 1 to 2 minutes to sign this petition. The way the legal system works, if we're going to sue the FDA, we need to show that we've at least asked them to change their mind. And that can happen with a petition. I need to get tens of thousands of signatures on this and send it to the FDA, and that may be all it takes to let them say, okay, you want to do clinical research, we don't really like it, go ahead and do it because all these people are behind you. Now, I'm not asking anyone to go to jail. This individual, civil rights activist, he sat at a Woolworths lunch counter, whites only, and they arrested him. Now they said, we'll let you out of jail, but you have to promise not to go back to those whites-only lunch counters. His response is, well, if you let me out today, I'll go right back to that Woolworths lunch counter and I'll order breakfast. So he was in jail for 6 months, never knew if he was going to get out. Never knew it, but he stayed there, and other people started to realize this guy's incarcerated, shouldn't be, so this guy's a hero. And I'm not asking anyone, by the way, to go to jail. I'm just asking you to spend 1 to 2 minutes signing an online petition. It's not that hard, and I think everyone thinks everyone will do it. I don't have to. It doesn't work that way. Not only do you have to do it, you got to tell everyone you know that the FDA is holding back clinical research, and we're not knowing really what's going on. We're not knowing which of these therapies are really working. We just don't know until we do the research. And by way of example, combination therapies. I showed this 4 years ago. You put rapamycin, lithium, and a senolytic together. You extend fruit fly lifespan 48%. Wow. Okay, but if you only use one, you only get 11%. You put 2, 30. Put 3 together, you get the 48% increase. And the reason I'm telling you this is the FDA says, well, you can do a study on metformin by itself or rapamycin by itself or NAD infusions or dasatinib, but you can't put all those drugs together. Now, our response is, we've got thousands of people doing this already, and we don't know if it's working, we don't even know if it's safe, but we have people doing it anyway, like me. And they still said, no, we're afraid that someone might suffer an injury by taking all those drugs on an off-label basis. So this is a significant issue. But the good news is we can counter the FDA's argument. This study came out January 2023. It talked about the absolute need to use combinations of age reversal interventions in order to slow and or reverse biological aging. There's no single compound out there that's going to do it for you. You need combinations, and we need to test these combinations in clinical trials. So I've shown this slide many times. This was 2015, and then 2016 Wall Street Journal cover about using metformin by itself, and the FDA did approve of this study to study some of the aspects of aging, and Dr. Barzelli's got an international publicity about using metformin to see what can be done to slow aging, maybe even reverse it. The problem is, as of September 1st, 2023, we don't know of a single patient enrolled in his study. This is 8 years after he got approval for it and received some funding. No one's in it that we know of. And I say we know of, the FDA censors what a clinical trial investigator is allowed to publicize. And they're not always allowed to publicize what's going on in the study until the FDA approves of everything, and then they can release that data. So as far as we know, no one's enrolled in that study. If there is, please correct me. But this is why we need to change the rules. And this is where one solution is the perpetual project. This is different than a clinical study. But what this aims to do, utilize all of the scientific advances that we're taking advantage of now and measure the results in thousands of people in real time. Meticulous analysis of what's going on in real time. And this is very simplistic, this diagram, I hope you understand. You take your data, and I do mean everyone's data, by the way. Again, people just think everyone else will do this and then they get the benefits. But we take your data, your blood tests, your diagnostics, your interventions, your lifestyle. We combine that with thousands of other people like us, upload into an analytics database, and then we can measure the trends to rapidly identify what's going on in patient-driven regenerative interventions. In other words, what you are doing right now, we want to evaluate that in your body. We want to help you along, by the way, with new information that we garner, but also evaluate it in thousands and thousands of people. And to emphasize what this is, it is not a clinical trial. You're, of course, paying for your blood test, and you then, whatever you're going to buy as far as an intervention, there's no termination date because our goal is to keep our members alive forever, the people join this project. So we want to track what you're doing right now, patient-driven treatments. We want to see how well are they working in a group of thousands and thousands of people. Now this is, by the way, is not up and running yet. I want to emphasize that. We are working around the clock. I have a full-time staff working on this. You can pre-enroll into this project at age-reversal.net. But the reason you should do that is, well, frankly, it's a good way to keep track of your medical records. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody. I have blood test results scattered all over the place. I want them in a central database so I can store and retrieve them and compare whatever blood test results I get back to where I was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and provide doctors with comprehensive data, including nice charts and everything else. We want to identify what's working in a large group of people to delay biological aging. So when this is up and running and the pre-registration is available right now, no cost, by the way, this is all free. I'm putting my money into this for the purpose of expediting our knowledge base of research. You join, you can pre-register for this at the age-reversal.net website. I'll show that one more time, at least before I conclude here. The House of Optimal Health, I'm going to probably show this until I don't have any people in the audience misbehaving. And that is, you cannot rush out and expect an regenerative therapy to have a meaningful impact if you don't have a healthy foundation. Level 1, of course, that could go on with dozens and dozens. That's sleep quality, as you heard Brian talk about, but also glucose, blood pressure, insulin, C-reactive protein. You got to optimize level 1 if you're going to really progress to level 2. Because if you don't have a healthy foundation, and I know this, unfortunately, because there are former RAADfest attendees, very dedicated, and they ignored level 1 and they died. It's that simple. You have to optimize level 1 and then progress to those other level 2, and you can optimize level 1 sometimes within a couple month period. So please don't let one of these disease-causing factors cause you to, well, prematurely deanimate. We don't want that to happen. So there are blood tests available, by the way, in the exhibition hall. For level 1, LabCorp has a blood draw station, and for more advanced testing of your aging process, including NAD levels, including the DNA methylation test, well, Genfinity, True Diagnostic, they're in Rad City. You go in for a blood draw, and they can tell you a lot about how you're aging. But I don't want to neglect level 1. Make sure you don't have factors in your blood right now that could kill you before the regenerative therapies save your life. We don't have time for delayed age reversal. I've been doing this professionally since 1977. I've had people tell me all the different things they're doing to keep them alive a long time. Most of those people are deceased. I mean, they lived longer than they were supposed to, but they didn't think they had to do everything. And if you don't do everything, you're in bad shape. So the billionaires, since the last RAADfest, lots and lots of dead billionaires, one after another, with huge amounts of money, $20 billion. Wow, what I could do with that kind of money. And lots of money. They die sometimes at an old age, sometimes a relatively young age. And it's unfortunate because they're not putting their money to good use. Here's the guy that started Red Bull, worth $27 billion, dead at age 78. I don't know what happened when he turned 70 or 72 and he knew what aging did, but I don't know of him writing any checks to anti-aging organizations or doing real-world research that may have enabled him to stay alive as opposed to being dead with all that money. Co-founder Subway, dead. It's just ridiculous when I see these kind of fortunes and realize these people aren't putting money into research. Because unfortunately, you'd like to take that money into the grave with you. It doesn't work that way. You go in the grave, the money goes to somebody else, so you're hoarding all that money and not funding aging research. I mentioned the Better Humans group. There's a lot of groups at RAADfest that you could write checks to who are doing spectacular work. And if you have the extra money and you make charitable contributions, consider giving it to aging research organizations, because unfortunately, that's what's going to kill us. And here we have this type of evidence indicating that treatments for cancer and Parkinson's, heart failure, they're right around the corner. We're not far away, but we need to stay alive. Standing in our way is the FDA. They're denying us access to clinical trials. The Human Age Reversal Project, some of you may remember this. I spent a couple years raising over $1 million. It all sits there, by the way, in a broker account, earning a little interest, but we're aging faster than what's earning interest. But my commitment was I will fund all of the overhead costs. This money will only be used to pay for the interventions, the diagnostics, the physicians, contract research organizations. That's what this money is for. And I haven't spent a cent of it because the FDA rejected our investigational new drug application. They said you cannot test metformin plus rapamycin plus dasatinib plus NAD plus exosomes plus young plasma. They said, you can't do that all at once. I said, we've got people doing that already. It's not anything novel, and so far no one's died that we know of. We just need to evaluate, are these therapies working the way we hope they are? Are there any dangers? FDA still said no. If we get that petition signed, I think we can do a lot. And you look at history, the penalty people pay for challenging authority, well, I sure did. I mean, they threatened me with life in prison. And I fought back, and I won and curbed the FDA's power. I want to give people incentive to know the FDA, even though they're in the federal government, you think they can't be challenged and won. Well, we've done it all the time. So again, large protest resulted in the FDA letting HIV people having anything they wanted, turning HIV into a manageable condition. We're looking to turn aging into a manageable disease, so we don't inevitably die of the aging process. So please, age-reversal.net, put your name onto the petition. I believe it's under 2 minutes to do that, maybe 3. And considering people went to jail for very good causes, you shouldn't feel bad about putting your name on a petition. So to pre-register for the Perpetual Project, sign the petition, age-reversal.net. It's all free, by the way. This is a group that I put a lot of money into just to advance the science, share knowledge amongst different group members about what we're doing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. But again, I'm showing this terrifying slide. This should frighten us. The fact that there's a lot of technology being evolved, but there's a 17-year wait, and about 1 in 5 interventions ends up in routine clinical practice. It means a lot of people are suffering and dying when effective therapies may already exist to deal with degenerative disease and aging.
Super. Bill Faloon, ladies and gentlemen.